Vincent and the Grenadines. Hello, Caribbean. Hello, world. Thank you for joining us for another edition of Page Turners Plus. The last time you saw us, we were discussing Cassie P. Caribbean PI, a novel by Cecil Browne, who is a Vincentian writer living in the United Kingdom. Cecil grew up in St. Vincent and the Grenadines until his teen years when he moved to the United Kingdom. He's been a mathematics lecturer for most of his life, but he's also probably an underground writer. I think probably that's the best way to describe him. He is the regional winner for 2022 of the Commonwealth Short Story Competition. The short story is called A Hat for Lemer. Welcome, Cecil. Thank you for coming.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
All right. Now, when we discussed last week, Cassie P. and A Hat for Lemer, we noticed that you seem to have a fascination with PIs, with sleuths, with women sleuths in particular. We were wondering what that is about. What is that fascination about?
Well, it's really the fact that Lemer developed from Cassie P. Cassie P. I wrote in 2019, and I was submitting to the Commonwealth Short Story, and I thought, well, why not have this character, Cassie, in a sense, transplanted back 200 years to see how she would cope in a different society. So I chose a female character because one, I'd done it before, as it were, with Cassie P. So there's no great mystery to it, and I chose a woman because I think it helps to get into places where perhaps men wouldn't normally go. So
That's
it's a simple reason, nothing more elaborate than that.
That's interesting because apart from their professions, Cassie P didn't and Lemma don't seem that similar to me, but perhaps we can discuss that more later. I'm going to invite Kessawa now to come in with some questions.
Hi, Cassie, Cecil.
Thank you.
Thank you for being with us. I'm going to kind of continue on the same line of questioning. Actually, I don't think it's that typical, but could be wrong. But it felt like quite an unusual choice for a male writer to choose as his main character a woman. And so I guess the real question is, like, for you, how do you think you might have drawn the character differently? What traits might they not have or have had? You talked a little bit about access to places. What made having a female investigator important to your story for you, either for Lemma or for Cassie P?
I think as a writer, I find that I extend myself a lot more if I have unfamiliar people. So if I wrote characters as a male, I think I tend to get frivolous or flippant, and because I know what a man would do normally. You try to put yourself into that space, and so by having a female character, it forces me to think, hang on, how would people react to her? How would she react to different situations? So the choice really is made as a writer to extend myself to draw on things I wouldn't normally draw on.
Good day, Cecil. Good to meet you.
And
Okay. All of Cassie's cases involve family drama or betrayals by friends. Was that a conscious choice? And if so, why did you make that choice?
I didn't think of it until I actually, you put the question to me. I just thought, well, let's find a series of cases for Cassie to explore, cases that are not so transparent at the beginning that the reader is going to say, I can spot who did it. I didn't really think of them as family dramas or as cases that explore the family. But in a sense, I'm happy that it actually does come out in it, because the family is something I consider very important and something that we've probably underexplored in Caribbean literature. And so yes, the betrayal, vengeance, justice, all these come out in mysteries. I think if you listen to the police and so on, they tend to tell you that most crime is committed within the family or by somebody that you know. You don't get a random events very often. So all the crime, all the major crime, all the mysteries are solved or take place within the family or friendship structures. The person who goes along and just commits a crime 20 miles away from home really is would be very unusual.
So
So,
basically,
it seems to me to situate all this within the family or within
uh,
the friendship groups.
you drew from what you knew, and it wasn't like particular or acutely Caribbean.
I think it's Caribbean. I can't see. Certainly, the dramas could happen elsewhere, but I've tried to create a very much a picture of what Vincentian and other Caribbean islands would be like. But I can see these transferring to other countries as well. But what I've tried to do is to really say, let's make her, let's make Cassie Vincentian Caribbean, and let's see how she goes about. And in doing so, let's just reveal a little bit of Caribbean society at the same time. That's partly the interest I had in creating this character.
Okay, thank you.
Cecil, I'm very curious about the time setting for a Hat for Lemma. You set it exactly 20 years after emancipation. Why is that?
The number 20 itself isn't that significant, but I didn't want to set it directly after, like say 2-3 years after emancipation, when the enslaved people hadn't really truly found their feet. Obviously, if we think emancipation now, they're able to leave the estates in theory, but of course they can't because they're tied. Whatever they wear, their clothing, everything belongs to the estate owner. So I wanted to give them a bit more space to try to find their feet. And so 15, 20 years along when they've had time to decide, let me see how I set out and forge a life for myself. Let me see what others around me are doing. Let me see where I can fit in or I can lead, what kind of life I can get for myself. So the figure 20 isn't magical in that sense, but it's just a time frame for people to have had a good look to see that they can control their lives and what kind of path they're trying to create for themselves.
I mean, it's a fascinating time period, and I agree with Paula. It's a really interesting choice, even if it's not a magical thing. The idea of a generation after enslavement ends. Yeah, it's particularly in English-speaking Caribbean, of course, because 1858, excuse me, is only 10 years after enslavement in the French Caribbean, and it hasn't yet happened in the Dutch. So it is a really interesting time period for that reason. But I'm getting distracted. That wasn't my question. I wanted actually to come back to this idea of the Caribbean context of the novel. You mentioned you wanted to have a sleuth, you want to have a mystery, and I love that you chose mystery as the genre that you think you're kind of attached to, because I think many of our elders were fans of Murder, She Wrote. And I really got the sense of Cassie P being a sort of Jessica Fletcher type character in her community. It's a small community where people are getting murdered left, right, and center for some reason. And it's a drama every week to find out how is she going to solve it this time. But she's very involved. But I also think it speaks to the idea of a community that isn't. No, sorry, let me rephrase that. I think it speaks to the non-pathologization. That was a terrible choice of language. But essentially, when you put that, you bring out this kind of nice idea of a warm, friendly, quite connected Caribbean community, but at the same time, crime is happening and it doesn't pathologize the people. I think for Black people, often it's a tension to have kind of crime happen, but not all Black people to be bad. You kind of fighting this stereotype of Black negativity, of Black, and that's what I'm trying to say, the pathologizing of Blackness. but at the same time you are allowing crimes to happen, and I think keeping it in the family does speak to, like you say, the reality of how crime happens. um but my question, I'm going to come to a question here, is I just think that's really well done, and I wanted to kind of say that. But I
Thank
think the
you.
question is, were you also responding somewhat to, I think, in a British context, we're thinking about Death in Paradise and the way that misrepresents so many Caribbean communities. I mean, my particular bugbear, having lived in the Francophone Caribbean, is this idea that people come from the UK and dress more formally in a work environment than Caribbean people do. And year after year, it was the absolute opposite. The English person would arrive, or the French person would arrive and want to wear like sandals to the office. People are like, that's beachwear. We don't wear that in the office.
Mm.
And I thought you really captured these kind of realities of Caribbean daily life in a way that that very famous popular program doesn't.
Yeah.
So was that a conscious choice on your part, or was it just a question, or was it something else?
I have watched Death in Paradise. I must say that in the middle of winter, when it's dark and cold and so on, and I know lots of Caribbean people watch it, not because of the plot or the fact that this English character is solving problems, but for the simple reason that we want to see some sun and to almost get the heat to come out of the television back into our homes. But the program is silly. There's no two ways about it. It's extremely silly. We've got an Englishman coming to the Caribbean dressed in a suit in the hot sun, pouncing about and can't cook, can't is scared of lizards and all that kind of foolishness. And and it just happens that all the characters come in, and the characters who are killed are all English and white and so on. And people keep screaming, why don't we have some black murders or some black crime as well? Some Caribbean crime in it. So it's just so ridiculous. Yeah, in a sense, Cassie is a counter to this. This is what the real Caribbean is like. Cassie and her husband, they're started in the police force. Cassie makes a bad choice, and now she's got to rectify it in some way. And her husband, eventually the gambling leads to them meeting up and so on. So I've tried to create a Caribbean, the real Caribbean, and I can see this applying to not just SVG, but to all the Caribbean islands. I can just see something very, very similar happening. They're part of a community. That's the thing I'm trying to stress. They operate very much within a community with people who care for them and people that they love. And so it's the community idea that's very, the family community idea that's very important.
If I may, I'd like to come back to I had for Lemer. There's a section in the story where Lemer herself refers to Reverend Alexander, who shipped 200 enslaved people from, is that Layu, into Layu from Antigua. Yeah. Is that a historical fact? And if so, how does the story go?
Yeah. The funny thing is, I've been trying to find that for weeks, because I read it in a book by, we've got a historian, he's dead now, Dr. Adams, who told me, and I'd read it in one of his books, and I've been reading all these books for the last trying to find the blooming passage, and I couldn't, and I found it this morning in another article by a Cambridge historian. Reverend Browne had brought in his slaves from Caicos, the Caicos Islands. I think it's 600. I think they imported in 1806 to Grand Sable. Alexander Browne had a massive estate in Grand Sable, and he brought his 600 and odd enslaved people to St. Vincent with him to operate on his estate. And Browne is actually quite famous in the island, in the history of the island. He was the one who put forward the idea for tunnel, the Black Point Tunnel and the Byra Tunnel. and the enslaved people were the ones who constructed these two tunnels, which linked the town to the most prosperous part of the island, the Carib country, as they call it. So in 1813 and 1815, the enslaved people constructed, under his guidance and with his money, constructed these massive, like 300-foot tunnels to link the island. And so Browne was the person who financed all this. And if you know St. Vincent, you'll know there's a place called Brownstown up in Georgetown, the local place, and it's named after him. So the Browne family, no relation, hopefully, the Browne family were very instrumental in developing that particular area and made quite a lot of profit out of it as well.
Oh, so that sounds like a really significant piece of Vincentian history there. Then,
Yes, it's St. Vincent's history is incredibly fascinating. I was asked last week, a couple of weeks ago, was it 2 weeks ago, Kessoa? Is it at the British Library? I can't. Yeah, yeah. Somebody was saying to me, you must write something about this. But the history of St. Vincent is just phenomenal. The 1675 sinking of a ship off Beckway, and the slaves swimming to Beckway, and then coming back onto the mainland and forming, I'll say, the Black Caribs now, although a lot of people don't like to call them Caribs, the Garifuna and so on. So you have this slave ship and this idea that black people can't swim and all that nonsense. But these people, go into Beckway, coming onto the mainland and forming the Black Caribs, who then, have a guerrilla war with England for 100 years, who defeat thousands of British soldiers. It's a fascinating story, and part of my interest is to get some of that out in fiction to people who don't want to read straight history. They want they're happier getting their history via fiction, and why not? So that's part of my mission, really, as a writer, to fictionalize actual events, and sometimes it could be just a simple word. I remember having a story, and one of the characters was called, I think, Caroline Chatouet, and somebody said, that's an interesting name. Where do you get the word Chatouet from? And it leads you then to say, well, Chatouet was the Carib chief who really was the bane of the British. And it might take a small fact like that to get people investigating. Oh, I must find out a bit more about this Chatouet just by having a simple surname, a simple character with this name. So yes, I'm happy to introduce people to history via the route of fiction.
Speaking as a historian, I think Kessel would say the same. We do appreciate the novelists and the writers for thinking historically and introducing people to important factoids and stories in which they would never otherwise get, for people who don't read historical monographs or tomes. Um, so we're working together. That's
Yes,
what I would
yes,
say.
yes. Yeah. We have a duty in a sense to get these stories out there, so that people will develop, have their own personal development in their reading development. Yes, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
Cecil, that brings me to the question of the fact that your work, certainly your literary work, appears to be very centered in the Caribbean, even though you've lived in the United Kingdom since your teens. I'm wondering why it is that your work, I mean, there is a long tradition of Caribbean writers who live outside the region uh, still centering their work in the Caribbean. I'm wondering why you in particular do that rather than write about your experience as a Black British man, which I imagine you probably, I imagine you have a dual identity. I don't know if you think of yourself as a Black British man and as a Caribbean man, but you're right. You write it seems, well, we've only read A Hat for Lemma and Cassie P, but both concentrate on the Caribbean. Why is that?
I don't think we ever leave the Caribbean. That if I left when I was 13, and I've been here for X number of years. X tends to infinity. But in a sense, we never leave. We live in a small community, a small town just outside, 20 miles away from London, and I can step out my window, step out my door, and who would be there? I would see somebody from the local community. And what do we talk about? We talk about St. Vincent, we talk about the Caribbean, music, food, cricket. So in a sense, we've never actually left. So although we live this life in England, our whole foundation is based on those 15, 20 years in which we grew up. Everything that we have, our loves, our likes, our dislikes, everything was formed during that period. And so, and in a dark, cold winter, these are the things that support us. You know, the stories from school. I still have people I played cricket with at primary school when we were about 10. And he, he would remind me of those cricket games that we played. And so we have those connections still. So it's the music, reggae, calypso, soca, the dances that they allow us. They allow us to keep our Caribbeanness intact. And so when we get bombarded by insults or accusations and so on in England, we have that shield, that Caribbean shield, because we know we have our own music, our own food, our own sports, our own history. So we don't have that sense of that fragility that a lot of people who were born in England have. Caribbean. We don't have that fragility because we have that shield of knowing that, hang on, we've got lovely, beautiful islands. We've got the most beautiful islands in the world in the Caribbean. We have our own music, our own culture, our history, our sports. Our own literature. We've been as CLR James said, we've been world class in literature and sports for 100 years. So it provides a shield in a sense. And also, I should also add that part of my mission is to explore Vincentian society. A lot of people see England as being more important, and they see small islands as not being interesting, and people from tiny communities as not worth investigating. I think V.S. Naipaul, when he started writing, said the difficulty he had was that he didn't know what to write about. He had no topics to write about. What a stupid thing to say. What? How do you mean you have nothing? You don't know what to write about? Are you saying that the Caribbean is not worth writing about? Caribbean people are not worthy of being written about? So no. I'm saying that Caribbean people are fascinating. Wherever I go, they're the most inventive, devious, fascinating people you could ever meet. So there's always some character you want to listen to, or to say, tell me a bit about your story, because I find their sense of invention and tomfoolery, as somebody said, just so incredible that you could never run out of stories to write about Caribbean people.
Mm. May I ask a follow up there, Paula? I have not immigrated in the technical sense, but I grew up in one area of the United States which is quite unique, and historians would call the Caribbean. And I've migrated to a different part of the country, and I feel the longer I've lived outside of my hometown, the more attached I am to it.
Yes, I could.
So yeah, that's what I wanted to put forward to you
I
here.
could, I could fully understand that. You know, the physical places that you went to take on are significant. One of the things I have to resist is um, placing the setting. The setting always comes back to somewhere I knew from when I was young. So I'm always having to say no, no, no. Place the characters somewhere else. But those physical spaces, take on a significance that when you're away, that you simply didn't have. The little gestures, your grandparents. Right, the people in the villages and the community who are kind to you, they take on a significance now that you clearly wouldn't appreciate if you'd stayed. I find, yes. So
I mean,
mm.
sorry.
Cassie, I was going to call you in anyway, so go ahead.
I was gonna say the don't know what you got that you've gone phenomenal. Sounds like what you're talking about. I mean, I think there are plenty of people that appreciate it while they're there. So I think you should speak for yourselves.
Okay.
um, I wanted to come kind of. I picked up on what you said about places having significance, and I think some of the novels we've looked at this year, I'm thinking particularly of The Island of Forgetting by Jasmine Seeley. Sherry Jones's How the One Armed Sister Sweeps Her House, but probably most obviously in Ayanna Lloyd Banwo's When We Were Birds. All three writers kind of deliberately chose not to name the countries where their stories were set. And it's kind of interesting that you've kind of gone the opposite way. Actually, you talk about St. Vincent a lot in Cassie P, certainly. And I wondered why you'd made that different choice. You're not the only one. If you think about Miriam Chelsea's book, she also is quite specific about Haiti being the place that she's talking about and names places in the same way, perhaps that you do. But was there any conversation about whether you should kind of use a different name?
No. I think for a country just about emerging into having a space in written literature like St. Vincent and the Grenadines, I think it's essential that you name names. Just recently, there have been a whole load of people publishing books in St. Vincent. I've not had a chance to read a lot, so when I go home in a couple of weeks, I'll get a chance. But we don't have that strong written tradition, and in a sense, to conceal it would be to me to do it a disservice. So I want people to place the book and to say, when they're driving past this particular place, they will say, oh, so that's the Black Point Tunnel that he mentioned. When they go up to Fort Charlotte, oh yes, I can see what the view out to Beckway is. In the same way that when people go to London, they go to London to look for the London of Charles Dickens. So this is what I'm doing. I'm saying, when people see the places in St. Vincent, they see them with a different eye. They see them and think, oh, so this was what he was trying to say. When they see the birds, so that's what it looks like. So the physical space is very important, and so this is why I've said, yes, let's name names. I was castigated some years ago by a writer in St. Vincent because I'd used the names, but I'd messed up the geography. So, for example, I'd put town A next to town B, when in fact, in reality, they're like miles apart. And he said, "You can't do that." He said, "You can't do that. This place is like 2 miles away. Why are you putting it 15 miles away?" And I had to say to him, "It's fiction." And my friends tell me they like to see their places mentioned in a book. It's as simple as that. They want to see. They said, "I'm from Layu, and you put Layu in my book." I like that. I'm from Chester Cottage. They like to see their places mentioned in the book. And we must never underestimate how these little things, how important these little things are to people, to readers.
Cecil, you mentioned a few writers. Tell me, who do you like to read? Who are the writers you read most, and you'd recommend that our viewers read?
I've I've finished the how the one armed sister sweeps her, and also when we were birds. My goodness, and you just I wish I'd written those myself, because they're just so good. But there's just so many fantastic writers, especially female writers, coming out of the Caribbean at the minute. The women are just carrying the swing completely. There's no two ways about it. I tried to read Caribbean, so I enjoyed Marlon James' history of 7 killings, although my sister couldn't stand it because she said it was just too brutal. So I read Caribbean. I like V.S. Naipaul. I like his writing. I think, I think it was Derek Walcott who said nobody could write a sweeter sentence, but his work is so obnoxious. The very technical, the greatest technician, but his attitude towards Black people, towards the Caribbean, towards women, and so on, and it's a shame because he's just such a fabulous writer. You just read and you think, I wish I could write like that. I like Derek Walcott. I'm not a great one for I don't understand poetry all that well, so I'm still struggling with Walcott. But I was told to persevere that I would get there. I think Jacob Ross at the library said, and they said, just persevere, you'll get there in the end. But I read a lot of Caribbean writers. I tend to read a lot of history. As opposed to as well as fiction. I shouldn't say as opposed to fiction. So we had quite a lot of people come into the Caribbean in the 1800s, visiting the different islands, and they've left their accounts, and those are fascinating to read. So my reading is eclectic, I suppose I could say. I like Sherlock Holmes. I like mysteries. I like Tolstoy. I like Tolstoy. I like John Mortimer with his I don't know if you know Rumpole of the Old Bailey. So I read a fair number of writers. I wouldn't say I have a favorite, although Naipaul would be the one. I suppose you love him as well as hate him. Yeah, he's just so fascinating. I like Toni Morrison, obviously, Walter Mosley. So my and Aikwe Yama from Ghana. Aikwe Yama. I don't know if we had within the family his book, The 2000 Seasons, The Healers, and we can't find the wretched books. What somebody in the family's got it, and Armagh is to me incredible. When you try to find one now, it's like £60. But the 2000 Seasons and the Healers, the fabulous, absolutely fabulous. So, but there were just so many good writers out there. You just wish you had a dozen lifetimes so that you can.
I think all of us can relate to that feeling. Like, so many wonderful stories, not enough time.
Yeah, and I was going to say also, you wish you didn't have the daily chores of having to earn a living so that you can sit and read.
Absolutely. So, two kind of questions really from me. You're clearly an avid reader, and I suppose the question is, have you always been a really avid reader, or is that something that you picked up later in life? And the second question is, I know you've spoken quite passionately in the past about encouraging men to read, and you talked about a lot of the big kind of, well, big is probably not the right word, some of our most beloved writers at the moment and best being women coming out of the Caribbean. And I just kind of wondered if, as an avid reader, and if you could talk about your own journey as a writer, that was it. The journey from reader to writer, sorry, is what I meant to say.
As I said, I'm a lecturer in maths, so a lot of my reading has been mathematical and scientific. I've been reading pretty much all my life. One of the things I regret was that my primary school in St. Vincent didn't have a library, and even when I went to secondary school, I lived in the country, so I had to catch a van to go to school. in Kingstown. That was in the 70s. So I couldn't really access the books in the library, because in those days, if you missed the one van going back to the country, that was it. So I regret not having access to a full library when I was in my early teens. But yes, I've been reading for my own pleasure ever since I was a teenager. In terms of writing, I've always loved calypsos and telling stories and so on. So if we go out anywhere, I'm always the one telling some foolishness, telling some Nancy story or whatever it is. Uh, so in the same way, I like to listen, but I also like to tell. So writing is a natural continuation of that, in a sense. And probably 15 years ago or whatever it is, I thought, well, let me have a go at this. And it's then that you realize that writing is not as easy as putting one word behind the next one. It's not quite as it's not quite as simple as that. There's writing and there's writing well, and it's taken me quite a long time to try to master telling a story and um, telling a story well. So it's been a long journey, and even now, I think I'm still developing as a writer. I'm still trying to get used to the idea that you can pack a lot more into a sentence. So you don't just say it is hot. You show the heat by saying, I think it's from in Lemer, you say the sun roasting her 4 thick plaits, and that gives you two bits of information. She's got 4 thick plaits, and the sun is very hot. But it sounds very simple, but it's not quite as simple when you start writing. There really is a craft to writing, and it's something I've had to learn, and learn the hard way.
And that's a good segue into my question regarding style. How would you describe your own writing style? And I recognize that your style is evolving from what you just stated, ever evolving. All our writing styles are ever evolving. So, but could you pinpoint like a particularity about your style right now?
I don't know. I tried. I think the story or the character dictates the style. I had for Lemma. I can't see that being written in standard English. Let's put it that way. The story has a kind of urgency which comes out in the Caribbean-ness of the language. So I can't see. I don't think I have a particular style. I try to go with a character, and they lead me. They tell me this sounds right, or this doesn't sound very well. And sometimes you have to change from being the first person to the third person, because the story demands it. What I do think I have, and I think somebody pointed this out, they were saying that your work is written in English. I was told in St. Vincent once, one of your stories, why do you write in English like that? People in St. Vincent don't speak like this. And I said, well, it's not how you write it. It's actually how you read it. In essence, the story, the prose has a Caribbean rhythm to it. So 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 although I start the hat for Lemmer by saying rain pelt whole night in the mountains, although they're English words, rain pelt the whole night in the mountains, but when you read it, it's a Caribbean rhythm to it. Rain pelt the whole night in the mountain, and so the rhythm is in the Caribbeanness of the work. So I let whatever I'm writing tell me which is the best way to approach it. And if there is a style that people can recognize as mine, I'd be very I'd be very chuffed for somebody to say, oh, that sounds just like one of your bits. I'd be chuffed, but I don't know that I have a style.
Just before we leave, we're taking an excerpt from A Hat for Lemmer, which is Cecil's prize-winning short story. The next time you see us, We'll be discussing Marcia Douglas's The Marvelous Equations of the Dread, which is one of my favorite stories of all time. So please be sure to join us then. Bye bye, and thanks again for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Thank you. This is A Hat for Lemer, which won the Commonwealth Short Story Regional Prize for Europe and Canada in the Commonwealth Short Story Prize 2022. The story is set in St. Vincent in August 1858. Rain pelted the whole night in the mountain. It silenced the animals that love to break my sleep. It joined the wind and lashed my tiny wooden shack where the volcano ridge break for a bit of flat. Next morning, the sun battled back so fierce, the storm seemed like a bad dream. After such a stormy night, the ground still slippery. Strange to spot someone struggling up the slope to my home as I'm coconut oil in my hair. Caribs and runaways hunting wild pigs I could understand. But a white man and alone so deep in the mountain? From the narrow slit of a window, I catch the figure sweeping back the bushes like a paddler in a canoe. A heavy man with a red bulging food face. Mud splatter his trousers up to the belt, and the green jacket holding back his stomach catch a cake in two. This man brave. What he could want with me? I slip out the back door and take a path through the forest. Sometimes, best to greet an intruder hugging a tree. He make to take a step forward, his eyes on the house, as if it might disappear if he look away. Before he could tell himself, not far to go, he fall flat on his stomach. And Satan. He staggered to his feet, furious with some dry stick he didn't notice in his path. When he finished brushing off his clothes, he find me beside him, my narrow face soft but closed. You trip me, he growled. You throw me down. The blue veins in his neck pulse. This local-born Creole white who blend our language with his. But I don't step back when he snarl and grunt. He on Krong land, my land. I cross my arms and stare back. My name is Noah Brisbane, he say after a while. My horseman Mel tell me you know the island well. You guide people across the mountain and find those who get lost for a small sum. I dig my toes into the mud and force my body up the hill to my little garden patch, leaving him there muttering. Wheezing turned to cursing as he stumbled up behind me. I almost finished picking herbs at the side of the house by the time he reached. I own the estate 9 miles from Kingstown. 9 miles south of Kingston would place him in the Caribbean Sea. 9 miles north in Mespo Valley. West would find the town of Layou, where the Reverend Alexander shipping his 200 slaves from Antigua because he cared for them so much. The Brisbane now squatted on a stone in my yard must mean east then, the Diamond Estate. I begin to pack a crocus bag with herbs while he sweep the sweat from his forehead. My work is in listening. I ask when I'm ready. Brisbane take my silence to mean that I'm curious, so he say, you want to know why I'm here, I suppose? I don't answer him. My herbs are my living. Well, 2 weeks ago, I invited an Englishman to my home, Wesley String. The Methodist Church in England sent him to St. Vincent to report on the schools, but he's vanished. Schools? Brisbane asked the question for me, then continued. You remember emancipation in 1838? Well, schools spring up on coconut palm stilts, and where schools rise, inspectors follow. Brisbane. Emancipation handed some planters thousands of pounds. If February slipped by without effect, then March pay with 3. How long he here? 1 month. I sniff a bundle of time and let Brisbane carry on. I put on a small feast for String. Beef, red snapper, ham, breadfruit, bananas. We have to show our guests the best of the island, not true? My cook Eva did us proud. I pay her an extra shilling. Brisbane flipped back his head a little as his eyes closed on the memory of the meal. A chill hit us late in the evening, so I sent for a brandy. My wife Georgina changed into her green silk dress, and String drained his glass. "Another tiddy bottle?" he suggested. "Hats off to a new friendship, eh, Brisbane?" Thank you.